everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to go ahead and give everybody a couple of minutes here to get situated, and then we'll go ahead and get started. In the meantime, if you'd like to say hi, please use that chat button at the bottom to say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Remember to use that little drop-down caret to select everyone so we can all see. So great to have everybody here. And while you're getting situated, I am going to launch a little poll. If you would be so kind as to fill it out. Part of what the funding that makes these types of events happen means that we need to know where you're watching from. So if you could just answer these 3 questions, we'd be so appreciative. All right, there we go. And then once we get this done, we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, so fun to see folks from Grand Marais, visiting Grand Marais, San Francisco, Colorado, South Carolina, and Bloomington, and Michigan, Minneapolis. Awesome. Houston, the Lovigs in Iowa. Great to have folks joining us. Amherst Junction, Wisconsin. That place. So awesome. And Lutzen, Minnesota, just down the road. Wonderful. Looks like our numbers are still kind of ticking up and people are filling out that poll. We really appreciate it. And we'll get started in just a minute. It is North House tradition that we talk about the weather where we're at. So it was a beautiful sunny day here on the shore. When I woke up this morning, it was 10 below at my house. We have a pretty significant amount of snow where I live down in Tofty. I think the ski report this morning said we're at 92 inches for the season, which is pretty good. So 10 below and sunny felt awesome this morning. Madeline, what's it like where you're at?
0 inches of snow in Guatemala.
0 inches, yes. Great. As is to be hoped for, I guess. So
yes.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for filling out that poll. Much appreciated. I think we can go ahead and get started. So, well, welcome everybody. My name is Jessa Frost. I'm the program director at North House Folk School in Grand Marais, Minnesota. It is a pleasure to meet with all of you on Zoom tonight as part of our annual Fiber Week festivities. We've been hosting the Northern Fiber Retreat or Fiber Week or Fiber Month. It's gone by lots of different titles for the last 11 years. But the idea is that there are an awful lot of us out there who have a passion for textiles and the skills and the materials and the artisans who work with them and the color and these soft items that just enhance our lives, and that we should devote some time to telling those stories. We used to mostly tell those stories and make those crafts in our blue and red buildings up on the harbor in Grand Marais. But thanks to the advent of Zoomland, we've now had a chance to really expand our capacity to do storytelling, both in the audience who can join us and the guests that we can invite. So this month, or this week for Fiber Week, we have some incredible international guests joining us to share their stories. So tonight we'll be hearing from Guatemala. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Join me right back here to hear stories from felting traditions in Kyrgyzstan. At 10 o'clock, we'll be joined by a Sami textile artist from the Kola Peninsula, which is just between Finland and Russia. And then at noon, the inimitable Anmor Sambo will be joining us from Norway. And then next week, we'll have a local story with our very own Laura Brown. So I hope that lots of folks are able to join us. If you can't make all those, don't worry. We'll post the recordings on our website, northhouse.org. Give us 24 hours or so to do that, and you can check them out later. So I think that's most of what I wanted to tell you. I would be remiss if I did not share the news that we are very busily adding the rest of our 2022 North House courses to our website. So we're moments away from having pretty much most of our coursework for the year listed. It will open for registration on February 28th for members and March 1st for the general public. At the same time, our scholarship program and scholarship application will open. So I really encourage you to check out northhouse.org, start planning a trip to Grand Marais, pass the word to folks who you think ought to make that trip, and don't let finances be a barrier to learning craft. Apply for a scholarship if you need one. So last detail before we get started is a little bit of Zoom keeping. We are going to ask that you hold your questions until the end. We've left lots of time for questions. We hope there's lots of questions, but the place to put them is in that Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So that's 2 little text message looking bubbles. You put the questions there, we won't lose them. You're welcome to add comments and other things in the chat. That's a great place to just say, wow, that's beautiful, or ask for clarification. But the best way to get your question answered is in the Q&A. This presentation is also being closed captioned, so you should be able to turn that on using the little closed caption button at the bottom. They are generated by artificial intelligence, and they're, close and pretty good, so hopefully helpful to you. I think that's the end of my Zoom housekeeping. So I'm really delighted to welcome Laura Brown, who is a resident artist at North House, part of our Artisan Development Program. For 2 years, she is a textile artist, and she's here to tell us more about our guest and presentation tonight. Laura, it's all you.
Thank you, Jessa. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited about this webinar and everyone that's gathered. And so I'm here to give a little introduction to our presenter, Madeline, and the organization that she's going to be telling us about this evening, Multicolores. Multicolores is a Guatemalan nonprofit association that supports Indigenous Maya women in their process of self-discovery and artistic development. Multicolores programs are transformative, creating long-term sustainable impacts that strengthen entire communities. They use art as a tool for exploration and expression, igniting the artist's many talents and abilities and catalyzing their development as powerful agents of change. Multicolores works with groups of Maya women from around the Guatemalan highlands. Their artists represent 9 rural and semi-rural communities. As an organization, they thrive on building connections with their local and global communities. And to tell you a little bit about Madeline tonight, she's passionate about the power of art, design, and communities of women to generate positive social change. At Multicolores, Madeline leads the Creative and Economic Development Program, the organization's flagship program, which provides creative development and income generating opportunities to more than 60 Maya women in rural communities in the Guatemalan highlands. Madeline speaks English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole, and brings more than 10 years of experience with artisan and fair trade businesses and nonprofits. Madeline hails from St. Paul, Minnesota, and first came to Guatemala as a Thomas J. Watson Fellow in 2010, studying women's craft organizations and cultural sustainability. A lifelong creative maker and craftswoman, Madeline has studied craft techniques with master craftswomen and a few men in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Haiti, Egypt, Uganda, Indonesia, and Mongolia. She is currently making a crazy quilt and practicing digital illustration. Madeline, we're just so pleased to have you here tonight, and I can't wait to hear what you're going to share. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Jessa. Thank you to the whole North House Folk School community. It's so much fun to get to talk with all of you this evening, and really excited also to get to have a little bit of conversation towards the end of the presentation. I just wanted to say before we get started a little bit of housekeeping. I am calling into you from Guatemala, and so you may hear a little bit of background noise. Our office, which is located in Panajachel on the shores of Lake Atitlan, is also right in front of a rather busy public transit depot. So sometimes we hear the noises of buses coming and going. It's just part of the experience. So please bear with me if there's a little bit of sound in the background. And Jessa, if you wouldn't mind getting our presentation started. Wonderful. So I'm so honored to be able to share as part of Fiber Week a little bit about the story of Multicolores and our Maya women artists here in Guatemala. First, I imagine you all might be thinking, why is a woman from Minnesota speaking to me about artists from Guatemala? And I do wish that it were possible for the artists to join me here tonight because of the short hour-long time block. That makes translation back and forth a little bit difficult. And also because the artists live in different communities, that would make it a little bit difficult for them to travel. I am here representing them and hope to share a little bit about my really amazing experience that I've had working with Multicolores and with these extremely talented artists. I have been with Multicolores for 3 years now as creative director, although I first got to know the organization in one of the very, very first rug hooking workshops that later became a whole program and became a nonprofit organization in its own right. During that time, I have had the privilege of getting to know Maya women from different communities. And we'll talk a little bit more towards the end about ways that you will, ways that I would suggest if you are interested in getting to connect a little bit more directly with those artists. And please do also, as Jessa mentioned, use the chat. I'd love to hear your questions toward the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. And Jessa, could you go to the next slide here? Wonderful. So Multicolores works with 9 different groups of artists across 2 different craft techniques. Our artists are from 3 of the different Maya ethnicities represented within Guatemala, Chica, and Sutujil. And as you can see, the artist communities are spread throughout the Guatemalan highlands. The highlands are the central region of Guatemala, and it's where the Maya population is. It's the region that has the highest percentage of Maya indigenous people. And I say 60 plus because we are really happy to share that some of our groups are growing and have invited new artists to join their groups. So we're hoping to be able to grow that number within the next year as our groups continue to grow and thrive. And to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the 9 artist groups work with 2 different craft techniques, embroidery and rug hooking. And this evening, because North House does offer classes in rug hooking, we'll be focusing a little bit more on that technique. It's also the technique that we started out with as Multicolores. But you'll see that the embroidery artists are also very much interwoven to the story of Multicolores, and the work that they do really does exemplify what makes us special as an organization. So here you can see 2 exemplary art pieces created by 2 Multicolores artists, one from Totonicapán and the other from Patanatic. And you'll know, one of the questions that you may have, I certainly had, is why rug hooking? Guatemala, as you might know, and as this beautiful embroidered story cloth depicts, is a country that's really known for its textile tradition and specifically for its weaving tradition. So why introduce rug hooking, which is a craft technique that is associated more with the UK, it came to great prominence and popularity in the US as well. Why introduce this new technique into a country and a culture that already has these very, very rich very rich textile heritage? And the answer is that for many, many Indigenous weavers in Guatemala, there's simply not enough opportunity for them to access a market that will pay them a decent and fair income for their work. So many Maya women artists who are extraordinarily talented at using backstrap looms create beautiful pieces of art and then cannot find a buyer who will be able to pay even enough to cover the cost of their materials and labor. And this is an injustice that has impacted Maya communities and also has resulted in the loss of some of these textile traditions over time, as people are not able to use those traditions in order to earn a fair and viable income for their families. So I'd like to share a little bit more about the story of Multicolores through the course of 3 decisions and turning points in the organization's development. Next slide. I really think we can often learn a lot from what happens at these forks in the road. So the first decision I'd like to talk about with Multicolores is the choice to use recycled material. So some of you who've taken rug hooking class or are avid rug hookers may use wool in your designs. It's very common among rug hookers in the US, and I know in Europe as well, to use strips of wool in their designs. And in fact, in the very first rug hooking workshops, where rug hooking artists from the US came down to Guatemala and were teaching this technique to members of existing weaving cooperatives, they brought wool with them, as well as the base cloth, the hooks, and the materials that they needed to get started making these creations. And after that first round of workshops, they'd run out of some of those materials, and they needed just a quick resupply of materials. So someone went out to what's called the paca store. You see the paca store, a photograph of one of the paca stores here in Panajachel on the left. Paca is a secondhand clothing store. They're very, very common here in Guatemala, and they've become increasingly common in the last 20 years. Paca actually means bale. It refers to the fact that the clothing that is sold in these stores arrives baled up, and it comes from the unsold merchandise that gets donated to Goodwill or other secondhand clothes sellers in the US, and increasingly in other countries as well. So the paca store is where they went to go grab some quick material to be able to use in the rug hooking workshop once they had used up that wool that they brought with them. And what happened was something a little bit magic. The artists enjoyed having this diversity of different colors. And they said, this makes more sense than importing new wool from another place. Why don't we go to the paca stores and we can purchase our own materials locally? Every one of the artist communities has a paca store in their community. And the truth is, you can see again, looking at this photo of the paca store, there's the yellow sign says, Hoy se abrió paca, which means today we opened a bale. And the fact is that the business model of these paca stores means that they have to keep a constant flow of new merchandise in order to draw people in and to advertise that they've got new clothing coming in. But that supply of clothing is just too much for the local market, for what the local market can bear. There's an excess, and that excess ends up going to the Guatemalan landfill. So truly, what started as a momentary necessity and a quick decision became something that started to just make a lot of sense. Using locally available materials, a little bit of cash influx to these local businesses selling paca, and also recycling a material that very often is going to end up in the landfill. So the beautiful rugs that you're going to see presented in this slideshow are all made out of recycled garments like t-shirts that come from oftentimes cast off clothing from the US, thrift stores like Goodwill. So the next slide, please. And I want to talk a little bit more about paca because I think that the other impact this had with Multicolores is it informed our values. On the left here, you can see this really beautiful assortment of different huipiles. Huipiles are blouses, traditionally woven and embroidered blouses, which represent different Maya communities in Guatemala. And these weavings have a lot of meaning and connection to identity. But they are also very expensive and they take a lot of time to make. And the influx of paca has placed some pressure on Maya women who pretty fiercely held on to their tradition of wearing huipiles by having this huge influx of cheap clothing. So paca is a little bit of a complex issue in Guatemala, and we're really proud to be able to be part of a solution to the waste problem and also the idea of using that paca in a way that makes sense for these communities. It's also become part of our organizational values to make decisions in the interest of caring for the environment. So at the right here, you can see later on when we developed the embroidery project, we actually were thinking about different ways in which we could incorporate environmentally sustainable materials into the embroidered products as well. And this is the pica pica that we ended up using as filling for some of our stuffed doll products. And it's made up of little snack bags that have been washed and cut up and saved from the landfill. So that little decision became something that has now informed all of our organizational values. On to the next slide. And I should just say that we do calculate the amount of paca used. And in 2021, the artists recycled the equivalent of more than 6,800 t-shirts in their rugs. So the second decision, early in the development of Multicolores, we were working with women who had chosen to attend the series of workshops. And we were working individually with those groups of women. So the idea was, okay, we're organizing a project and we'll work individually with the different women who are interested in participating in this project. Over the course of time, we saw a need to train more women. And so the decision was made to form a train the trainers program to be able to have ambassadors for teaching the technique and the design style to other women in their communities. And through that process of training teachers to go out and be ambassadors for this new opportunity, there naturally began to form some groups. But what we really saw as a benefit an unanticipated benefit of this, first the train the trainer relationship between teacher and student and ambassador and new member of the community, was that there was a real value to the bonds of social solidarity that started to develop in these rural Mayan communities. Many of these women had never been part of a group. Many of them had never worked outside their home before. And so as soon as they began teaching one another, meeting together, really important personal development started to happen. This was the first time many of the women had been offered the opportunity to be leaders and to develop their leadership skills. And we saw at the graduation program of the Teach the Teachers program, when each artist was offered the opportunity to invite their families, and all of them did, that there was something else to this process. Not just about expanding the amount of opportunities and being able to produce more rugs, but that the group identity itself could be really powerful and impactful. So this sense of trust and connection between Maya women of the same community and of different communities. The striking thing is that many of them told us that they would never have met each other otherwise, even though they did live in the same communities. And what we've seen is that women earning income for the first time is a significant change for their families. And this change is positive. Many of them will loudly declare how positive it's been for themselves and their families, but change is also hard. And it's much easier to be able to be agents of change and affect change in your families and in your communities if you do it with a group support and solidarity. Next slide, please. So the third decision I want to talk about is the decision to create unique pieces of artwork. This is a model that really sets Multicolores apart from other fair trade organizations and most other companies. There's the kind of conventional model would be to develop a product, then move into production phase, in which you're producing multiples of that product in order to distribute it to an audience of people. And that is exactly what Multicolores thought that we would do. So early on in the process of our growth and development, we developed a wholesale collection to be able to sell at a higher volume. And we thought this will be a great step forward. We'll be able to offer more steady income, more income to more people. And this could be a really financially sustainable and exciting opportunity for everyone. So the artist produced a set of samples. The designs were a little bit simpler than this incredible piece that you see here, produced by Petronila Jorgeset, in order to be replicable on a grander scale. And after producing the samples, the artists asked for a meeting. And they said that having produced those samples, they had come to a decision. that they were more interested in the personal expression and the value of that creation of unique pieces than they were in ramping up that production and scaling up the amount of work that they were going to do. They found so much value in the process of creating pieces that are unique and that express their unique artistic voice that they prioritize that above the idea of growth and expansion in terms of producing more and more often. And that's something that has really powerfully influenced our identity and our place in this market. And you'll hear also that it's influenced everything up until the language that I use. We refer to the artists as artists and not as artisans. And that's not in any way to devalue the work of artisans. But we really feel as though the unique place that Multicolores is able to occupy is in celebrating artists, folk artists, who are masters of their craft, but who are also adding something else, which is their individual creative consciousness, expression, and story to the pieces that they make. So what we do in Multicolores is we invest in these women and their design capabilities through workshops, through follow up with them about their designs, and through celebrating the story that is in each piece. To the next slide, please. And now I'd just like to share a few stories about where we are today and how we are thriving at this moment, which has been very challenging, of course, over the last few years. Oh, okay, sorry. I skipped this. I thought we were skipping ahead another slide. This, again, this slide I wanted to include because you can see our very lovely sisters, Yolanda and Irma Churunel, some of our most ambitious and consistent producers among all of the artists. Here you can see some of the techniques that these two have employed in their development as artists. You can see that they're using templates. These templates are actually inspired by the traditional weavings of their communities. They've changed the scale, increased the scale of these designs to make them come alive in the pieces like this rug on the left, where you can see these geometric representations of animals that would typically be found in a wheat peel of their community. But they've interpreted it in a completely different way, adding their take, adding their color sense and sensibility. And through developing, so the development of templates, original templates that are inspired by both woven designs and also the natural world around them, is one of the artistic tools that the artists have developed and utilized kind of to create these incredible and excellent pieces of artwork. Now to the next slide, please. So again, one of the ways that Multicolores is able to thrive, and especially in this, with a model of creating unique pieces of artwork, is by creating a culture of design innovation. You can go to the next slide, please. If we're going to create unique pieces of artwork, every piece is going to be absolutely one of a kind. That means that every one of the artists needs to be an expert in quality control, in the design process, and in her own creative voice and expression. But also as an organization, we had to be able to define what our collective identity was. And we did that through a collaborative process of establishment of design principles. So these are 6 symbols which represent the design principles. And the reason that they are symbols is that many of the artists that we work with are illiterate. So anytime that we're doing trainings, workshops, other kinds of education opportunities, we are very cognizant of the fact of using different kinds of learning tools in order to cater to and support artists with different learning styles. So I'm going to talk specifically a little bit about our first design principle, but I will run through all of them really quickly. So the first design principle, number one, is to seek inspiration in woven garments and the textile traditions of Guatemala. Number two is avoid the use of trite imagery of any kind. Number three is that you can create a dynamic composition by mixing both geometric and natural figures. Number four is that you can vary the scale of different elements in your design in order to create a dynamic and exciting composition. And number five is add life and vitality to your design by focusing on details. Number six is specifically for rugs and not for embroideries, and it focuses on the idea of creating, if you add a border, to create a border that makes sense with the scale of your design. So let's go to the next slide, please. So in order to thrive in this context of creating one-of-a-kind pieces and supporting the artists in their own process of becoming expert designers, we have created a culture of design innovation within Multicolores. So here, let's talk a little bit more about what design principle number one really looks like. At the left here, once again, we have our artists from Chua Cruz, which is a community close to Solola. So it's one of our closest groups. And they took this group portrait together wearing their huipiles and cortes. So their indumentaria maya, that's the traditional woven clothing that they have worn through generations, and that has been a marker of Maya identity through many, many generations of oppression and social exclusion. And here on the right is a piece that was created by Micaela. Micaela is pictured here on the left, and she's the oldest of three sisters who are part of this group. And this piece by Micaela celebrates, really literally centers the indumentaria maya as an expression of beauty. And what's powerful about that in the context of Maya communities is that Maya identity, and specifically wearing indumentaria maya, is frequently associated with discrimination. So there is a lot of pressure, especially for Maya women who do enter professional workspaces, to stop wearing their indumentaria maya because it's not seen as professional. It's not seen as modern or as the marker of a person who has achieved a lot. And here Micaela is really flipping the script on that. And instead of just celebrating all of the beauty of her textile tradition and its connection to the natural world. So I love this piece also because Micaela is a weaver. She is one of the artists who was part of a weaving group and then learned this technique and applied the creative knowledge and understanding that she has and understanding of the symbols in the weavings that she makes to make absolutely stunning works with a different textile tradition. To the next slide, please. I also wanted to share this piece, which was it was the image used for promotion for this talk. And it's an embroidered story cloth by Micaela, a different Micaela. And it's entitled Freedom. So here we see, going back to the design principle number one, seek inspiration in weavings and woven heritage. In this piece, Micaela is using the woven tocoyal, which is a ceremonial garment worn by women of Santiago Atitlan. It's a beautiful, intricately embroidered, kind of thin strap of weaving that's wound around and around the head. And here she's using it as a symbol and as a metaphor for freedom, for liberty and expression, and claiming her identity and the value of that identity and the beauty of it. So I love this piece. Let's go to the next slide, please. Connected to this idea of finding kind of a common ground of design language, a common design identity that applies across all of the different artists creating unique pieces, is this idea of celebrating Maya culture and tradition. And again, as I mentioned, in Guatemala, Maya communities, which tend to be rural, face a lot of barriers. And Maya women even more so than men, face lots and lots of barriers to opportunity. So the idea of celebrating Maya culture and tradition is really powerful for the artists. And in many cases, creating these artworks in the context of Multicolores is the first time they've had the opportunity to really explore that form of expression and those traditions. So I'd love to read a story cloth that relates to a story that Rosa had heard and wanted to research more about the ancient Maya relationship with the lunar cycles. So Rosa, this was a story that Rosa didn't learn in school and wasn't taught to her in the sense of a tradition of pride. But when prompted to create a story cloth about Maya heritage and tradition, she researched the relationship that the ancient Maya had and their understanding of astronomy in order to create this piece. And similarly, at the right here, this is a rug created by Irma Turunel, which is an homage to the Maya calendar. And the ancient Maya did have, as well as a very advanced form of hieroglyphic writing. They also had an incredible and very visually beautiful calendar with rich meaning, as well as the visual language of the different glyphs. So you can see each one of these figures has different meanings. Some of them are words, some of them are syllables, some of them are numbers, and some of them are what's called nahuales, which are symbolic representations associated with every day of the Maya calendar. And depending on which day you're born in the Maya calendar cycle, your nahual kind of conveys different strengths, different possible inclinations to your personality. And once again, it's interesting because Irma is someone who is very, very talented at creating artworks that use Maya glyphs and symbols. More recently, she's actually been working on a series of pieces that use entire hieroglyphic words in her work in order to convey different meanings. But the first time she actually had the opportunity to learn about the glyphs and their meanings was through a Multicolores workshop. Many of the artists had never been taught or never had the opportunity to learn in school about the Maya hieroglyphic language. They speak Maya languages, but they did not have the opportunity to learn about that written tradition. So these artistic opportunities are also opportunities for the artists to really claim, own, and explore their own cultural heritage. Go to the next slide, please. And this shows up in stories as well. One of our more recent innovations in the last few years has been the idea of creating story cloths and story rugs. And some of the artists, when invited to take part in this workshop, froze up a little bit. And they said, well, I don't have any stories to tell. And Petronila, who's pictured here, Petronila Jorge said, we saw her really beautiful piece earlier. She's one of our youngest artists, and she comes from Quijel, close to Chichicastenango. And Petronila did not have that exact hesitation about telling stories. She right away said, I know what story I'm going to tell. And the story that she told in this piece at left is a story that was told to her by her grandfather. Petronila has a really close relationship with both her grandfather and her grandmother. Her grandmother is a weaver, and her grandfather loves to tell stories about the origin of the community, about traditions, like healing traditions. And Petronila has a really strong connection to both of them and to the heritage that they bring. So right away, Petronila was off to the races. This was her very first story rug. And she wanted to tell the story of the building of a bridge that allowed passage between two different communities in her valley. And I love how this piece turned out. I love the way that she did incorporate both geometric designs and these natural figures to create this composition of the bridge linking these different people. And the name of her town, Quijel, actually means horse in Quiche, or place of horses. So she's represented the people of her town as the horse figures crossing the bridge and able to move back and forth between communities for the first time. Petronila also wrote recently in an artist statement for the piece that we saw earlier in the presentation about how her creative expression and her creative development has been helped by her grandmother. She and her grandmother sit together, and her grandmother weaves and she makes rugs. So even though Petronila is working with a new textile technique, she's using some of those same traditions and some of the same motifs that have been passed down from generation to generation in her community. Can we go to the next slide, please? Another real cornerstone of how Multicolores has thrived, and this is true certainly during the pandemic, but I think also during the trajectory of our growth, is by designing and envisioning a more equitable future for our artists and their communities. And what's most important about this point is really that this is led not by the Multicolores team, not by myself, not by my colleague who is our coordinator of social programs, but really by the artists themselves. So as I mentioned earlier, we realized early on in the process of creating the organization that would become Multicolores that the social and personal and professional development angle of the work that we do is just as important as the artistic expression. And that those leadership opportunities for Maya women to be teachers, to be recognized, to be gathering with other groups of women were just as important as the income earning and recognition that they gained from creating works of art that were sold and exhibited around the world. And in this slide, I'd love to talk about Nicolasa, who's pictured here holding up a tree seedling that she planted. Nicolasa is a graduate of our 3-year leadership program. And she very quickly exhibited amazing capacity for leadership, which she then applied to, after the first year of the leadership program, she applied to be part of her community's council. So like the city council, essentially, of her small town. And her first step was to launch an initiative, essentially a protest against the placement of a garbage dump that would have been kind of a excess garbage dump for another larger town's waste located in their community. And so that was her first project as part of city council, and she was successful in petitioning her community, gathering the residents of her community to petition against the installation of this garbage dump in her town. And in this photo, at the conclusion of the leadership program, each one of the leaders designed a project that they thought would positively impact their community for the long run. And Nicolasa and her partner, Glendy, decided that they were going to design a reforestation project. So they planted the tree seedlings, they identified a plot of land that had high risk for erosion and was close to the main thoroughfare, main highway through their community, and gained permission to be able to plant trees on that land. And they did. They planted hundreds of tree seedlings. They gathered their children, their friends, their husbands to help implement this project. And they've reforested a whole hillside that previously, every time there were heavy rains, would wash out and cover the road in dirt and rocks. And this is the kind of leadership, obviously this project itself was supported by Multicolores, and we are so proud that Nicolasa chose to use her leadership skills to impact her community in this way specifically. But truly, this is the change that we're most excited to see within Multicolores, is that the artists, upon first expressing their own experiences, their own voices, and then earning income through the creation of these pieces of artwork, become agents of change in their families. I should mention that Nicolasa and other members of the leadership program faced a lot of pushback for their husbands initially when they first committed to the program, which required travel every month, leaving behind their children, having to delegate household tasks to other people. And several of their husbands were really opposed to that kind of participation. But over time, that changed. Nicolasa and other artists now report that their husbands actually helped them with their process of of creating their artworks. Some of their husbands help go to the paca for them or help wash the clothes before they're cut into strips and made into rugs. So it's little changes that are first impacting their families on the family level. And then, as Nicolasa has done, impacting their communities, contributing to healthier and more beautiful places to live. And so we're really proud of the way our leaders have grown and thrived in this way. Next slide, please. So here, I just wanted to share this story cloth from one of our artists, Ramon and Domingo Pan. And here she's expressing exactly the trend that I mentioned, that many women are shouldered with the burdens of their household work and are not able to pursue other opportunities outside of those responsibilities. In Guatemala, the average woman spends 36 hours per week on unpaid household labor. And I'm certain that's even higher in rural Maya communities like where our artists live. And right here, we have our very first artist interns here in the office, Hilda and Micaela. Hilda here at the right is one of the artists who had never had a job prior to working with Multicolores. And she really appreciated the opportunity to work from her home on her rugs, so she could continue to be caring for her children and take care of other household responsibilities. And Hilda is one of the artists who, with the support of her compañeras, her group members, has succeeded in changing her husband's mind about her participation in things like this internship program, where for the first time she's leaving her young children for an entire week to be able to come to the Multicolores office and work and learn professional skills, which is something she never had the opportunity to do with the necessity of leaving school at a pretty young age. And something interesting that I would just like to note is that, well, COVID-19 hit Guatemala really hard, and especially economically has been really challenging for all of Guatemala, but certainly the rural communities where our artists live. COVID did actually accelerate some of this social change within the artist communities. The artists were able to keep working throughout the whole pandemic. We were able to guarantee them that continued work, and many of their husbands were out of work. So for the first time, many of the artists had become the top income earners in their families before that, but for the first time, many of them were the only income earners in their families. And we did see a lot of change. Some of the artists, one of them made a piece actually about the fact that her husband had been taking on more childcare so that she could work more often during that time. Let's slip to the next slide, please. And I just want to say, Hilda she set the goal of working on her math skills and her computer skills, and she's just doing exceptionally well and picking up Excel really fast, and we're really proud of her advancement. And I think I'd like to end on that thought, which is that Multicolores, pictured here is a piece, well, 3 pieces, but exhibited in a gallery in Washington, D.C. And this is the thought that I want to leave you with, which is that Multicolores really seeks to elevate and celebrate the work of our artists, the richness of their traditions, their communities, not only as artisans, but also as artists, but also as bearers of these ancestral, important, valuable Indigenous traditions, and also as these agents of a social change, creating really beautiful and sustainable impact in their communities and in their families. So I'm excited to open up to questions and hear what you all have to respond to. I think I have one last slide, which is like contact information. So I don't know if you want to leave that up just in case. But let's jump into questions probably first.
Yeah, that, thank you so much for sharing all of that. There have been comments in the chat and about just how beautiful the work is. And I felt very touched by hearing those stories and seeing all of the beautiful colors and patterns and everything. So a couple of questions from the audience. People want to know if they can buy this stuff. People want to know like, what is the final market? And I know the answer to this question, but I'll let you go for it.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. We do actually sell the majority of the pieces in the United States. Multicolores has a website where you can purchase pieces online. And we also do, I know we have a lot of folks in Minnesota, so we do some pop-up markets in the Twin Cities. I also shout out our founders store, Cultural Cloth, down in Wisconsin. But yes, the pieces are available, both embroideries and rugs, on our website, multicolores.org.
Wonderful. And then you kind of answered the question about pushback from husbands about this kind of thing, but has there been like other sort of resistance or anything like that to have to overcome?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I will say, like, the Nicolasa, when she tells that story about like organizing the town, like being part of her town council for the first time and organizing this protest, when she first brought up the idea of like protesting against this dump, she said that one of the men on the town council said, "It's too bad that such a good idea came from a woman." So I would say, like, the artists have really, many of them have faced significant personal obstacles to get to the point where they're expressing themselves, traveling, things that we might take for granted are not common opportunities for Maya women in rural communities. Yeah, so I think that's probably, I mean, any challenge that we face, like as an organization, definitely pales in comparison to those challenges and kind of like the courage that the artists exhibit on a personal level. I'll think about if there's anything else, but.
Yeah, I think I could really, I mean, there were things that you were talking about where I thought, even, I think it's safe to say that most of our audience tonight is women. And I think that there is a lot of stuff in these specific stories that we can kind of all identify, whether we're confronting our own fear of using our voices or nervousness about creative expression in particular, just how important community can be for those kinds of encouragement and empowerment. So I just think that that's, I always am trying to connect specific stories to universal truths. And so that really stood out to me. I have a question about, it sounds like the women are meeting, the artists are meeting in their communities and sometimes all together, but are they mostly doing their work in their homes, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mentioned super briefly that one of the things that some of the artists appreciate is the opportunity to work from their homes. So yes, the artists work on their pieces in their homes, and they typically, most groups meet at least once a week. Monthly, they gather all their pieces, the finished pieces together, and then representatives from the group travel to our office to drop off those pieces. And then we also organize workshops, creative workshops, like the storytelling workshop, where we invite representatives from all the different groups. So those are times when they have the opportunity to meet each other, make new friendships, And programs like the leadership program that I mentioned also involve artists from all of the different groups coming together to learn together, spend time together. But the work itself is primarily done in their homes, and many of them do have at least one or two of their monthly meeting or their weekly meetings are just time to work together and talk about their pieces and give each other advice about their designs, etc.
Oh, that's so great. So
I know,
wonderful.
right?
Yeah. And then one last question about material. When you choose recycled clothing from the paca, do you choose natural materials like cotton or anything depending, like what's the most important factor? Is it the color? Is it the material? It sounds like there's lots of t-shirts, so maybe cotton, but knits. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
So this is something cool because the artists have established standards for what pieces they can work with based on their experience with what turns out nicely, essentially. So they prioritize pretty much all jersey. And t-shirts are very abundant, although there's more and more blends also. So I would say there's still a majority cotton on all of the pieces that they make, but quite a few of them are now incorporating like cotton poly, rayon, other kinds of fiber blends. And the artists are extremely talented at picking out these clothes. So like they'll go into a paca store, which is kind of can be a chaotic environment. And like from across the room, they can tell whether a garment is going to work, whether they can cut it and kind of pull it and stretch it into a little snake, or whether they have to cut it vertically and then fold it over. So they have very kind of like precise standards, but all the artists also basically develop kind of like a library of colors that they can use like this. And then they pull a color palette for each piece as they go based on those colors. Good question. But so basically they don't use any wovens. It's primarily cotton, but some of them are blends.
Yeah, wonderful. It is now 8 o'clock. We could keep talking about this for so long. There's like still lots of comments in the chat, lots of good questions. But I'm going to leave it there and just say another thank you to you, Madeline, for sharing your time and all of this like wonderful information with us. And the recording, if you missed any part of it tonight, it will be on the website, northhouse.org, sometime tomorrow. And I believe there's also links from North House's website, but again, the website is multicolores.org for any more information. So yeah, thank you all for coming tonight, for joining us, for coming out in the cold. Just kidding. Yeah, so thank you all.
Thank you so much, Laura and Jessa, and to all of North House. Yeah. And thanks to all of you for coming.